piece of news that has gone by largely unnoticed is the fact that Novation is bringing out over 1,000 new presets for the Novation Peak, and of course it works with the Summit as well. They're working with some really talented musicians and music producers and sound designers, and all of these presets are free. You can download them and install them on your Peak via Components website. Now when you're watching this, my sounds for the Novation Peak should be out on Components as well. So my name is Bo, and this is Bobeats, a channel about synths and music production. If you want to, you should subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates about stuff that makes bleeps and bloops. So in today's video, we're taking a brief look at what's inside of Components, and then I'll go over how I made some of my presets and give you some tips and tricks on sound design on the Novation Peak. It's a lot of FM stuff, because that's sort of the theme of my pack, frequency modulation between the different oscillators. So if that's something you want to see, stick around for that. So to get a hold of these presets, you go to the Components website, you click here on Peak, and here on the left side you're seeing the ever-growing lists of new presets. For example, my friend Jamie has his own little pack here, and my pack will be available here as well. It should be available when this video launches anyway. You can even preview presets directly from Components. And I think one of my favorite features is that you can create your own user bank and just take whatever sounds you want from these patches. You press here, new bank, create user bank, go in here to Sine Vibes here, drag and drop a few of his stuff, close it, expand here, drag and drop. And when you're ready, you can just save it. So you can download as a 6 file, or you could just send it to the Peak, but I always recommend just saving it. So it's that easy. So if you haven't checked out the preset, go and do it after the video. Create your own little custom bank that you can use with your favorites. And next up in the video, I'm going to show you how I created some of my favorite presets, giving you some tips and tricks. All right, so let's start with the patch that is called Subtle FM, and I think it's my favorite from this pack. So I kind of like it because it has this sort of FM character to it, and we'll get into how I made that. And if we listen to just one note, you can hear the sort of modulations going on. But when you do a chord, it's like, just creates movement. So if we take a look here on the Peak itself, if we're going to mod and slot number 1, you can see that I have some FM set up, some frequency modulations. So it's basically just 2 modulations that I have here. So slot number 1, we have frequency modulation using oscillator number 1, modulating oscillator number 2, depth 21. And then here on the second one, we have oscillator 2 modulating number 3. What does this actually mean in terms of sound? Well, the thing is, the Peak has this cool thing where you can create like FM chain reactions between the oscillators. So let me explain what that means. Here we have the dry sound. So it's quite boring, and if we take a look at the oscillators, you can see here oscillator number 1 here is a waveform called chords. Oscillator number 2 is a sine wave, and oscillator number 3 is a sine wave as well. So basically, if we go back here and if we take a look at 2 to 3, so we're using oscillator number 2, a sine wave, to modulate another sine wave. gives it a little more sharpness, but still not a lot is happening. But when we bring in oscillator number 1, things start to kind of react. So we're modulating oscillator number 2 using oscillator number 1, but oscillator number 2 is also modulating oscillator number 3. So when I do this, I just try and find like a nice balance, because you want some of that detuning effect, but you don't want it to sound awful. So this is what we end up with. So oscillator number 1 here, modulating number 2, which in turn is modulating number 3. So it can be a little confusing, but basically when we change the waveform on oscillator number 2, this of course in turn changes the frequency modulation of oscillator number 3, because of the way that these can be chained together. And one really cool thing on the peak is that you can actually do frequency modulation from oscillator number 3 to 1. So you can have this sort of loop going on where oscillator number 1 impacts 2, 2 impacts 3, and 3 impacts 1 again. And if you imagine that you could also use, say, envelopes to control the oscillators, set an LFO here to shape amount, for example. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could be doing to also impact how the individual oscillator behaves, which in turn will impact the loop, the frequency modulation loop that you've set up. So just to give you a little idea of things that are possible to do using this synth. The next patch I wanted to show you is called Asylum, and it sounds like this. One of my favorite chord progressions right there. So what's going on in this patch here? Well, in order to check that out, we're going to head over to the computer. So here we're looking at MIDI synth by Sigabort. He's actually a friend of mine, so I'll drop a link to this software in the description. It's basically an editor for the Novation Peak. So this patch here, Asylum, is a good example of many small things coming together, creating sort of a vibrant sound. There's not one or two big modulations going on, but rather many small. So let's go over them. In the oscillator section, you can see that I'm controlling the shape of the sound using LFO number 1. And if we take a look at LFO number 1, you can see that I have a bit of a fade in. It gives the LFO sort of a longer attack, so it doesn't trigger instantly. In the oscillator section, you can also see that I'm using mod envelope number 2 to pitch for 2 of the oscillators, number 1 and 2. And if we take a look at mod envelope number 2, you can see that it has a very quick attack, no hold, a little bit of a decay, slightly less sustain and release. This creates a very brief and quick pitch shift, and then it reverts back to the normal tuning. In the filter section, I'm using oscillator number 3 to modulate the filter, as well as mod envelope number 1 to filter. And here's just one interesting interaction effect I want to mention. I'm using oscillator number 3 to modulate the filter. It creates sort of a more gritty tone. And the shape of oscillator number 3 is also being modulated by the LFO. So when the LFO modulates the shape of the oscillator, it also changes the way the oscillator modulates the filter. So that's why you're hearing a lot of movement in the sound, even though we're not using the mod matrix. I've said this before, I think what Novation is doing in terms of post-launch support of their products is really good. I really want to highlight this. Not every company has this level of support, but I am seeing other companies follow suit. So I hope to see a trend where companies will support their products post-launch with updates, frequent updates, adding features that we want, and also providing us with more presets, because I know a lot of people want presets as sort of a source for inspiration and to use in their music. So I'm really happy to see Novation putting in the effort, working with some truly talented artists, music producers, and sound designers. I hope you enjoyed this little video. If you want to, you can stick around now for a little service announcement.
Hi, hello. This is an important service announcement about how you can help the channel. The videos and live streams do not magically appear. It's a lot of hard work. It's about a full-time job for me every single week. So if you feel like supporting what I do, go to Patreon. It's linked in the description. You can donate a small sum every month to keep the channel going and make it possible for me to make even more and better content. But I don't make any promises that I won't spend all the money on coffee. I mean, I won't, so support my coffee addiction, my synth videos over at patreon.com/Bobeats.